is coming to you from the beautiful metaverse. And welcome to Midday with Reverend Don. And as you can see, my office is still in a bit of disarray with lots of packing boxes because I've been doing lots of shipping of various books, including our super omnibus of magical incantations and invocations for all occasions, and also degree books and various other things. And if you're interested in any of our books, you can find out more at corellianpublishing.com. And also by following my social media. I hope you're having a lovely day. Thank you for joining me. Yesterday, we had an interview with Rhiannon Bennett and John Silversmith. Today, we just have me. So hopefully you will enjoy me as much as you enjoyed the interview. I am having a lot of fun bringing you these interviews. Every Thursday will be interview day. Some will be new, some will be old. Yesterday's interview was an older one. And good day to Surdware in the chat room. Welcome, Surdware. All is going well for me. I hope it is for you. Our interview yesterday, one of the things you may have noticed is that I did my most not to intrude myself into what the guests were saying. That's always been part of my interview style. And I think today, unless people have some questions, in which case, of course, we'll deal with those, I think I'm going to talk a bit about leadership. And although I don't know that I'd say that doing interviews is necessarily leadership as such, I think a lot of the same rules apply. And I'm going to start really with that. When you do an interview, in my opinion, it's the guest that you're trying to highlight, not yourself. You want to avoid intruding on the interview as much as you can. And many of the interviews I've done, if you watch them, you actually won't see or even hear me in the video because I'm not the subject of the interview. Now, some of the ones I'm doing today, yes, you will see me, but you'll notice that I do my best to help the interviewee bring out what they want to say and not to talk over it insofar as possible. I think one of the mistakes that people make, especially when they're new to doing interviews, is dominating over what the guest is saying, putting their own opinions in a little more than they need to. Now, certainly there are times that you may need to, and sometimes you want to register your agreement with the guest, or there may be other reasons you might wish to speak, but you need to be moderate in this because the interview is not about you, it's about them. And leadership is the same way. Leadership, if you're in a position that can be described as leadership, whether formal or informal, isn't about you. It's about the people you're serving. It absolutely should not be about your ego. It should not be about your feelings. That's not to say that it isn't perfectly natural that you should have ego and feelings. Of course you're going to. But you don't want to let those things cloud your judgment in making the right decisions for the situation that you're acting as leadership for, whether it's an event, maybe a single ritual, or a global organization. In all cases, you want to remember that your purpose for being there as leadership is to make things work for everyone, not just for yourself. Now, of course, you're not always going to make the right decisions. You're not always going to do the right thing. That just is not human. But you want to try, and you want to remember who you're really there for. I have often compared leadership and being in leadership positions, which I've been in for many years, with surfing. Because if you're dealing with almost any situation in leadership, then you're dealing with disparate people and situations that are going to be constantly shifting, and you're going to be having to constantly keep your balance and their balance in order to do a good job. And hello to Chad and the Blackman, and I'm sorry, Chad Blackman in the chat room. Hello, Chad. And Chad is saying he totally agrees with serving all people and says that he serves all people and uplifts them as he can. And I know this to be true. And hello to Lilith in the chat room, who also says hello to Sir Edward. And I love having people in the chat room. I think that makes this a much more interesting experience than some programs I've done in the past. And hello to Kazan in the chat room. Um, I think Kazan, or is it Kazani? I'm not certain. Um, if it's not Kazan, please let me know, and I will change my pronunciation. Um, but I've been doing radio and or video now for 30, well, more than 30 years. If we go from my very first appearance as a guest in video, we're going back to the mid 1980s, a very long time to go, when I was appearing on cable television. For those of you who remember when cable television was like the local brokered programming. Um, and somewhere I have a number of old tapes from those programs, but they would have to be severely updated technologically to be able to be used. And hello to Janet in the chat room. And I've been, as I was saying, in positions of leadership for a long time, and these two things really do dovetail in a lot of ways. And this is not going to be a course on leadership. This is just a discussion of the subject and as things come to me. But other ways in which leadership is like doing or being the subject of an interview. One of them is you have to be very mindful of the image you're creating, because it absolutely impacts the effectiveness of what you're doing. If you're doing an interview and you have any sense about what you're doing, you have to consider how you're coming across. That is a combination of how you're dressed, how you're posed, how you present your subject matter, which is probably the single most important thing. But all of these things are going to affect whether people pay any attention to you, whether they are receptive to what you have to say or not. Um, you can shut people down very easily. And of course, you're never going to please all the people all the time. But you do need to consider that that presentation is part of what you're doing. Definitely in an interview, but also in leadership. Um, and Kazan says, that's okay. I didn't realize that most hearing people have hard time to speak my nickname because I just changed the nickname from Lian to Kazan. I think this is part of deaf name. Sorry. Well, thank you, Kazan, for explaining that. And I will do my best to pronounce it correctly. And Kurdware says, being able to differentiate between ego worship and community serving is certainly very important. There are people who seek out positions of leadership just for ego, but you can see by what they do when that's the case. And I'm not saying that there isn't a certain amount of ego gratification in any position where you're doing anything whatsoever, because your ego is part of you. Some people use the term ego as if it were a dirty word. It's not. A healthy ego, which is self-love and self-respect, is very important. You don't want to not have that sense of ego. It's the wounded or the negative ego that you want to avoid. And Kazan says that they can be called either Cain or Zane if preferred. Well, thank you. I'm sure we will. And Marika, who is Lilith from the Netherlands, says that I can pronounce her name perfectly. And so is sure that I will manage the harder names. Language is one of my things. And although not directly touching on leadership, as the Corellian tradition became international, that actually proved to be quite important. I am not proficient in every language, but I have at least a little bit of a lot of languages, which has been extraordinarily helpful, particularly when it comes to the pronunciation of words. I also, and then I said it almost wrong. Yes, of course I would. And hello to Sir Ed, hello to Bradley, and hello to Aya. And we have lots of people in the chat room. I love that. And how does language relate to leadership? Well, language relates to both ego and leadership in the pagan community in a very particular way, and that there are lots of people who love to take it upon themselves and um, who love to take it upon themselves to be very, they love to correct other people's pronunciation, even when they don't necessarily know what they're doing. My attitude is, if somebody's trying, that's good. Some years ago on Magic TV, I had someone insisting that I had mispronounced the word geomancy, that it must be geomancy. And the particular vlog was on why I didn't really feel it mattered if you pronounced it correctly or not. It was more important that you had the idea. But when it comes down to it, if there is a proper way to pronounce that word in English, it's geomancy. The same as geometry or biology or any number of other words that come from the Greek. This is how they're brought into English. But if you say geomancy, I don't care. I think that's just fine. I think English is spoken in many different ways, as are most all languages. And I think that we need to be tolerant of these differences. What does that have to do with ego? Well, when you're too concerned with pronunciation, it's obviously an issue of ego. When you're in a position of leadership, you want to welcome people. You want to make them feel valued. You don't want to chase them away. And Lilith says that she'll have to talk to me face to face to help me pronounce it correctly again. And I would love to do that. I would love to come to the Netherlands and see Lilith and other people that I know there. In fact, I'm hoping that we can do a major tour in the next few years. Um, so that would be lovely. And with leadership, as I was saying, it's a lot like surfing. You never know what you're going to encounter. And you must have patience. One of the most important things I learned in my many years in positions of leadership was never answer that email immediately. If you're upset about it, wait at least 24 hours and you'll write something better. You may still be upset, but you won't be out of control. Whereas if you answer immediately, you may answer from emotion and not say what you should be saying. If you wait a day, you can use your mind to say exactly what you want, and bear in mind how easy it is for meaning to be mistaken in written communications. And obviously, I learned that through experience. And Lilith points out that I'm making a very good point about teaching. She herself teaches Dutch language to non-Dutch speakers, and that's wonderful. And yes, you must make the people who come to you feel like they want to be there, like they want to learn from you. Or why are you doing this? If you're in a position of leadership, you must treat everyone with respect insofar as possible. And I think respect is always possible. You can't always agree with them, but you can always show respect insofar as possible. And Janet says that she grew up in a family full of teachers, and this matriarchal family always had language discussions, and her aunts had her walk around with books on her head, and I think that was probably a very good thing. And Aya says exactly, respect and wanting to make them feel safe. And yes, I mean, what kind of organization are you running if you're not doing that? One of the things that is hardest about being in a position of leadership is that sometimes you do have to enforce certain rules. You may have to expel certain people because of things they've done. And I always found this a very difficult thing, and something that I always took I always tried to resolve situations through as many means as possible before coming to expulsion. I never, in all my years, expelled anyone quickly, I don't believe. There had always been previous attempts, at rectifying it unless they had actually done something that could not be tolerated. Um, Obviously, if someone was found to have done something criminal, that was an entirely different matter. Although usually, because we do background checks, we never had to deal with that. But that would be a different matter. But the kind of thing that normally happens, I think that it's best to make as many attempts to bring the person to where they need to be as possible. But when you do come to the point that someone cannot work within the system, um, you need to be very careful how you deal with that. There has to have actually been something. It can't be that you don't like them. What kind of person are you if you put people out of an organization because you don't like them? It can't be because you've simply had a disagreement. What kind of leader are you if you put out everyone who disagrees with you? There has to have been something they did to actually merit it. And in my opinion, you have to have tried to resolve the situation in other ways before you take that action if you want to be regarded well. Um, and Lilith also says that she feels you have the responsibility to make foreigners welcome, especially when they're coming from a war zone, and I would agree with that. And Aya remarks on serving quite a few people who've been cast aside, but still need community. And, you know, well, you know, I was going to say in the current era, but really in all eras, there are some people who are treated very badly by society, but are actually very good people, and they can be wonderful to have in your organization. Um, which is one reason you must be careful not to let preconceived judgment necessarily blind you to a person's good points. And that too is an important thing of leadership. I think, you know, my late mother was very fond of the saying that you must take people where you find them. That is, you can't expect everyone to necessarily be at your level, and that's especially true if you are, for example, the head of an organization. Of course, the people you're dealing with aren't going to have the same experiences, and you have to realize that. One of the things that I remember very strongly when I was writing the Corellian first degree lessons for the standardized courses, when I was first writing it, Sir Edward read what I was writing and pointed out to me that I was using a lot of jargon that the people reading these lessons would not know, and that I needed to explain these words if I was going to use them. And it had never occurred to me, because I was long into my Imperium when I was doing this. I guess I'd say I'd forgotten what it was to not know these words that were more or less unique to our community. So I went back and I rewrote, and I changed how I was writing as I went forward, with the understanding that things must be explained that a person on the street would not know. Um, and ever since then, I've tried to keep this in mind. I think that, in fact, we probably use rather too much jargon in our community, and would benefit from a little less. But what we do use, what we must use, we should explain to people, not just assume that they would somehow know it if they've never been to a pagan temple before, for example, or never read a book before. Of course, this will be new to them. And Chad in the chat room says that people can only grow by relating and talking sensibly. And those uncomfortable but necessary conversations don't happen as often as they should. And Lilith says, on the subject of people who've been cast aside, that sometimes she herself feels that way, but cast aside people need the same attention that cast in people need. And it's discriminatory if you don't, and that's exactly true. I have known over the course of the years many people who were leading temples or groups who would only deal with people who were exactly like them. And I cannot too strongly disagree with that point of view. Partly because, in fact, it is discriminatory, but more importantly, in my point of view, it totally hamstrings your organization. If you never bring in people with new and fresh ideas, or different ways of looking at things, what's going to happen? You're going to fossilize and you're going to die. If you love your organization, if you love the people you're working with, you will keep them learning new things. You will keep them meeting new people. And you won't limit yourself to only the people who are like you or like what you already know. Because it's those differences that spur growth. It's those differences that move people and groups forward. If you get everybody doing exactly the same thing and saying exactly the same thing, then you really have failed them. You want to have them thinking, you want to have them growing, you want to have them moving forward, and you want to have them welcoming all kinds of different people, because that's what makes life worthwhile. It's what makes organizations worthwhile. And Lilith in the chat room says, boom, that right there. And I appreciate that. And obviously, I agree. I have known, as I say, I've known people in positions of leadership who would only take the worthy people, but worthy meant sharing all of the exact same ideas with them. Didn't mean being good people, didn't mean being skillful, it didn't mean being learned, it meant being in lockstep. And I really don't see any benefit to that. Now, you also don't want people who are contrarians for the sake of being contrarians, people who are going to disagree with every word. That's not constructive either. But most people are not that. In, I believe, second degree, and probably again in third degree, I tell a story from Caroline Myss, a noted New Age author, who advises people to always be willing to give help and advice when asked the first time. The second time, if the person returns to you with the exact same problem, be there for them again. But begin by saying, did you apply the things I suggested? And if so, how did they go? And be willing to advise them again the second time. If they come back a third time with the same problem and they have not done anything to change it, then they're never going to change it. And you want to, at that point, advise them one more time, but not again, because at that point, it's become obvious they're not doing it. And Aya says that they just used the term contrarian to describe their 14-year-old daughter, and says, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. And in second degree, we talk about a lot of the things that can plague a group. There's a wonderful old book called, oh, what is it called? It's on disruptors in the church. It's a Christian book, but it's relevant to any organization. I know that's not the exact right name, but it's been a while since I saw it. But it talks about how there are certain kinds of people who are professional disruptors. And in a position of leadership, you have to watch for that too. So it's a fine line. And this is why I describe being a leader as surfing, because you want to be welcoming to everyone. You want to be encouraging to everyone, but you also have to be conscious of the fact that there are some people who are just there to cause problems. And you want to try to work with them, but you also need to know when to stop working with people who are doing that. And Lilith says, please don't tell me book titles because I'm a book hoarder. I have lots of room to talk, as you can see. I wish I could actually remember the name of that book, but I can't at this moment. But if I come across it later, it might be right here on the shelves. I will certainly give it, because it's very useful for anyone who is in that position of leadership in a group of any kind. Because there are people who will seek their ego gratification through constant disruption. And CDC in the chat room, hello CDC, remarks that understanding one's leadership style, including its strengths and weaknesses, is a wonderful way to learn how to work in groups. I absolutely agree with that. And in talking about my leadership style, I don't necessarily think it's everybody's. Um, People come in all different kinds, groups come in all different kinds. Um, so I'm speaking from my experience. And, I've had successes and failures, certainly. Over the years, I learned I was a little too tolerant on occasion, but that doesn't mean that I seek to not be tolerant. Um, but I am mindful that sometimes you need to act a little sooner. But I still believe very much that you try to resolve the situation before you can take any kind of drastic action. It's when you find you can't resolve it that you must take more drastic action. And as a leader, sometime, yes, you must do that. Um, Speaking for myself, I wish that were never necessary, but I have sometimes found it necessary. But not something ever to do lightly, and certainly not out of emotional reasons, nor out of ego, but because the person is actually causing a problem for the organization. Um, and I think that if you follow these principles, you can create very positive, very strong groups. The other thing, and we've talked about a little bit, is respect. And I think that to have a strong group, you also have to have respect. And respect, as they say, is something that you have to give in order to receive. And it's also very important to have respect for those who came before you, the people who have helped you. Um, I think it is a terrible mistake to ever lose that. Whenever I speak of people who have been mentors to me, such as Pete Pathfinder Davis, Gray Cat, the late Olivia Robertson, um, whose birthday was just yesterday, would have been 106 years old. These were all wonderful people, and they were all human. I'm sure they all had. I'm sure there are people somewhere who would have things to say that might not be as favorable as I, because all humans have that in common. But I have nothing but good to say about these people. Paul Bayerl, um, Frater Mercurius, these people were important mentors to me. And I will always maintain that respect. And hello to Fluffy in the chat room. Fluffy says that they have learned a lot about group dynamics by watching how I interact in group dynamics. And thank you, Fluffy. That's very kind of you to say. I appreciate that. I always came from the point of view that if you must leave a room, you want to leave the door open so that you may return if you wish to. That burning bridges is something you do only in the most serious of situations. And that's how I've tried to live my life. I've seen a lot of people behave more rashly in positions of power. And Aya remarks in the chat room that they had a drastic action taken against them and then reacted drastically, which led to greater drastic measures in return. It's a cycle, and I totally agree. If you can avoid that sort of thing, you're always going to be happier. And Chad in the black room remarks, Chad in the chat room. For some reason, Chad in the chat room is proving problematic for me to say today. But Chad in the chat room says that Pete Pathfinder was a wonderful conversationalist, and he remembers him fondly, and so he was. I used to spend hours every month talking to Pete by telephone back in the days when I was in the Pagan Press, and I learned so much from him. Also learned a great deal from Paul Bayerl, from Gray Cat. And although my close association with her came later, I learned a great deal from Olivia Robertson. I would have to say, for someone who is occasionally perceived as, quote, a daffy old lady, she was probably the most skillful politician I've ever met. And one of the ways that she did that was by being perceived by many people as a daffy old lady and underestimated for that reason. Um, she was very much sweetness and light in her presentation, but she was also as smart as anyone on the planet, and not someone to trifle with. Um, but by being a sweet old lady to appearances, people didn't always realize that. And I think that that was something that was very much to her advantage. Um, and of course, she was just a wonderful person. Speaking of wonderful conversationalists, she had the most interesting stories. Um, and Aya remarks that Pete used to come into their store and they would talk for hours. And and when the book The Secret came out, he elbowed them and said, "We don't need this because we already know the secret." That's very cool. And Janet remarks that women are often underestimated, and that's true. Many people are underestimated, and it amazes me sometimes how much people believe their own press. But with that, we've come to the end of our half hour, and I know that many people watch this program on their in their lunch period, so I don't want to take it all. So I'm going to close with a prayer, and I will see you on Monday when I will be talking about a new publication that's about to come out. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, help us to welcome those who are different from ourselves. Help us to open our hearts to the variety of life and the variety of living. Help us to be enriched by the people we meet and the experiences we have, and not threatened by them. Help us to grow and expand, even as this beautiful world of manifestation is in a state of constant growth and expansion. Let us do likewise. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we ask you this, and we thank you, and may you be blessed now and always. And may you be blessed now and always. Until next time.